Hosea chapter number 7. Israel rebels. God's desire for Israel is seen in the first verse when he said, "When I would have healed Israel, the iniquity of Ephraim was discovered, and the wickedness of Samaria, for they commit falsehood and and the thief cometh in, and the troop of robbers spoileth without. And they consider not in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own doings have beset them about. They are before my face. They make the king glad with their wickedness, and the princes with their lies. They are all adulterous as an oven heated by the baker, who ceaseth from raising after he hath kneaded the dough until it be leavened." So let's talk about this. What is God's desire in verse 1? To heal Israel. How does Israel respond to God's desire? Go ahead.
They don't like it.
Okay, how do they show they don't like it? They keep on committing iniquity, transgression. They keep on breaking what? God's. So let's stop here. God's law is what? It's perfect. It's good, right? So when God is working with a people and God is coming before them and he's showing them that he would heal them, that he would help them, that he would extend his grace towards them, and they refuse his law, what are they saying to God? Okay, here's a better way to put it. What is in the law of God? From these verses, as we study these verses, what's in the law of God? His what?
Commandments.
Yes, his commandments. But if he would help you and then you do exactly different than what his law says, he is extending help and healing out to you through his what? Through his law. So people think about God and they're like, man, God is my help. God is my refuge. God is my strength. God is, and they start quoting the Psalms, which is a good thing. One of these days I need to. A lot of you love the Psalms. I think too deeply when I read in the Psalms. I'm always trying to figure out what they're talking about. There is a really good series from Psalms, like a guy named Bruce Lackey was a teacher, and he does a really good job in preaching through the Psalms. I think I'm going to start that back up to help me get back into the Psalms. But the problem is people might quote that. I know people that walk around churches and quote stuff all the time from the Bible, and they go to war against the devil, but they don't ever spend any time in God's Old Testament looking at his character, looking at his nature, looking at his precepts. In God's precepts is healing, right? In God's precepts is safety. In God's precepts is the balm that takes care of the problem. Now, because of our sin, what can we never keep to its fullest? Okay, the law, the commandments, right? But in all of that, what do we forget sometimes? We act like the Old Testament is the Bible's stepchild that we're never supposed to look at, right? Like, we're not going to look at this stepchild. The red-headed stepchild in the African-American family. You know, it's like, that just doesn't work. Red-headed stepchild. And we look at that and we think about that and we like, oh, all these laws aren't something that we should have to keep. Now, we've gone through it enough to say that the New Testament repeats the Old Testament moral law. And there are parts of the law that we don't have to fulfill because Christ has fulfilled that part of the law as far as in the sacrificial sense. And also some of the law was to do with the theocracy that God had over Israel. So it's to do with Israel. Does everybody understand what I'm saying there? Okay. So when we remember the Sabbath, we're thinking about God's rest and his finished work on the cross. All right. So that's our remembering the Sabbath. We put our rest in Christ. Okay, but this is what I'm trying to say with all this. Healing, when Christ came, what did he fulfill? He fulfilled all the law. Did Christ disrespect the law? No, in many ways, he explained that the law wasn't just action, but it was heart attitude, right? So where does he do that in the most striking way? Matthew chapter number 5. They say unto you what I say. They say unto you, this is adultery, but I say. They say unto you, this is hate, but I say. Remember all those comparison and contrast between Christ's explanation of the law and the Pharisees' explanation of the law. Do you remember all that he does in chapter 5? So what is happening here? Your safety is following the precepts of God's law. Now, in your position, if you're in Christ, he has placed upon you his very righteousness. All right? So he has made you totally forgiven of the consequences of sin eternally because it's paid on the cross. However, what part of you hasn't been resurrected yet? In other words, what part of you hasn't felt the fullness of your salvation yet? Your what? Your body, right? When will we feel the fullness of that? Right? When the Lord calls us and the dead in Christ and rise first, then we are alive and remain will be caught up with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So shall we ever be with the Lord. Will be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. At that point, we'll receive the fullness bodily of our salvation. So therefore, we still live in a body that is dead because of sin. Your body, every day it's alive, dies another day. Right? All right. So tomorrow you have one less day to live than from today. I know that sounds very discouraging, but it's the truth. All right. So live the day good. And we look at this and we see the desires of our body, and that makes us not want to follow the precepts of God's law. Now, God shows us forgiveness, but there's almost, in a sense, even in the Christendom, not the church, because I really think the church is localized. I don't do this whole universal invisible church thing. I do think that there is something to be said about Christendom in the fullness of Christendom being in Christ. Okay, does everybody understand the difference? Christendom as a whole is being leavened with this philosophy that in order to show love, we excuse sin. I don't see that in God. See, because by excusing sin, so God would heal them, but what is their response? To disobey his law. Do you see that? And so can he provide healing to them while they're disobeying his laws and going their own? In fact, they're disobeying his law so much that as leaven infiltrates a lump, right? So all of you understand when you make bread and you want it to rise, you take whatever type of yeast you have. I'm used to the Blacksa yeast. You cut off a little portion of the Blacksa yeast. You put it in warm water and sugar, stir it around. Then you pour it in and mix the dough, right? What does happen is the yeast infiltrates part of the loaf or the whole loaf. So it's infiltrated the whole loaf. Well, what has happened with sin? He needs the dough until it's totally infiltrated within the loaf. And that's exactly what's up with Israel. Sin has totally infiltrated their land. The land of Israel, at every point, is being touched by rebellion against God. All right? That can happen to Bethel Baptist Church. Like a little excuses about sin, a little, God is love without saying yes, but his love is shown through his commandments and direction in our life. And this is not a popular, like people that preach hard against the sins that are accepted in this world are looked at as if they're as bad as the ones doing worse than the ones actually disobeying the law of God. We see this in the movements of our day. For me to preach against certain sins within our country could land me in jail, where, the sin that they're doing is just as bad. And they say, well, we're born that way. And my answer to that is, yeah, we're born liars, but nobody makes excuses for being a liar. Okay, if I were to tell you, I were to lie to you and steal money from you, and the judge pulled me up, and I say, Judge, I was just born that way. Since when does get out of jail free card, since when does it apply to I was born that way? I was just born with this huge anger problem, Judge, so I went on a killing rampage. But, I was born that way. Yeah. I was born biologically this way, but, emotionally I feel this way. Oh, well, we just got to go by your feelings. That doesn't apply for anything else. Oh, Sarah, I was just born to want a whole bunch of women once I got older. That's how I was born. You think she's going to accept that? No. Like, all of us are born certain ways with certain tendencies that are against the law of God. All of us. We yield ourselves to God. We don't make excuses for it, right? So you guys, I feel the temptation to make excuses for sin sometimes because we live in this culture that's making excuses for sin. If God tarries, you're going to feel it 10 times worse than I do when you hit our age, okay? You're going to feel it 10 times worse. You have to make a determination right now. God's way is what saves. My way is what destroys. Right? And so Israel is making the choice that they know better than God and that they can provide safety within going their own way. And that attitude infiltrated the whole country, right? So it can infiltrate church too. It can infiltrate you individually. And when it infiltrates you individually, that attitude can creep into the school. It can creep into the church. It can creep into your family. And that attitude can permeate not just you personally, but everything you touch. So we want to be careful to trust God, to look to his salvation, to look to his healing, and not our own.